In this video, I'm going to show you how I sharpen my pencils. It's a two-stage process, and I'm going to show you all of the materials I use, how I put them together, and essentially how I get those long, superfine conical points that I use to get nice even values when I'm working with graphite. For starters, I want to tell you what you need for this project. I've got here some masking tape. Nothing special about it, just regular old masking tape. Got my unsharpened pencils. These here are from Tombow. And I've got also some very fine grit sandpaper from 3M. This is a little piece of birch paneling. It's very thin. You can have one that's thicker than this, or you could even use a piece of cardboard that is about the same size. After that, I've got my utility blade that has these little removable sections so I can keep it really, really sharp. And that's just about it. Let's start with getting our pencil ready for the actual sharpening that we're going to do later. Now, while I'm doing this, I've got the blade pretty much parallel to the surface of the pencil. And rather than using this hand to push, I'm actually using my thumb to push the blade along the length of the pencil until I've removed just a little bit of wood each time. These little strips that I'm removing are really, really relatively thin. If you go too deep into the wood, you're probably going to take off a piece that is a little bit too large or uneven, which isn't going to be good for the process later on. Also notice I'm going around and around, removing it evenly from each side as I go. My eventual goal here is to get just about 1.5 inches or a couple centimeters of graphite fully exposed, so I'll really probably have to push this back a little bit further once I get down to the graphite. This is when you want to start being really, really careful about how hard you're pressing down on the graphite. If you push too hard, of course, what's going to happen is that you're going to break off this piece. What I'd like to have is the graphite evenly exposed from the wood on every side. I'm going to set this aside now, and we're going to make the sharpening block that I use to actually get down to the really fine conical point. I've got my piece of birch wood here, and I've got my sandpaper that conveniently fits from side to side here, leaving behind a little bit of space out here because eventually I'm going to need a place to hold my sharpening block. Taking a piece of masking tape that's long enough that it can wrap around the sides of the block is really useful. What I'd like to do in this instance is leave as much space exposed here as possible, so I'm only going to overlap by about 1/2 inch on the edge here. So you can see the tape wrapped around on each side. You can see that the sandpaper is affixed pretty tightly to the board, and it's ready now to be used for sharpening. So I'm going to hold it in my hand here. That way I have a kind of freedom to angle the pencil as I would like to on the sandpaper. And I'm going to grab the pencil here between these 3 fingers and essentially make sure that I have the graphite just about as parallel as I can to the surface of the sandpaper. I don't want to be pressing down into the sandpaper like this. I want it close to being parallel. This is where we need to be careful and mindful of how much pressure we put on the graphite while we're sharpening it. So many times I've broken pencils, broken graphite tips by pressing too hard during the sharpening process, especially if you have a very hard lead like a 4H. Just be patient. It's going to take a moment to get where you want to go. What you want to see while I'm doing this is that while I'm going back and forth, I'm actually twisting the pencil so that I'm getting an even sharpening on each side. Now, by the time you get to this really super fine point, the graphite at the very tip of that point is going to be so fragile that I find it's useful to actually drag a little bit the tip of the pencil over the sandpaper to remove that little bit of an excess tip. That can sometimes, when you're first applying it to the paper, leave a kind of extra dense or dark mark by kind of crumbling as you push it into the paper for the first time. So that's it. Pencil sharpening from A to Z.